today I'm joined by multi-exited founder and entrepreneur Dimple Patel, who is the CEO of NatureMetrics, the leading provider of nature data intelligence solutions. NatureMetrics harness transformative technologies like environmental DNA and AI to generate unprecedented biodiversity insights for businesses and governments globally. They have been recognized as a World Economic Forum Tech Pioneer 2024, Bloomberg NEF Pioneer 2024, and Earthshot Prize finalist the same year. So, Dimple, you hold 15 years experience from founding, scaling, and exiting multiple successful ventures such as Love Coffee and Truva. And your work span across a number of different sectors and geographies. You have led teams through international expansions and acquisitions, and your previous company ranked #1 in the Startups 100 list in 2020. And now you are in as CEO for another founder. And I wanted to hear if you can share with our audience a bit about the pioneer commitment from yourself and the company when it comes to biodiversity monitoring.
Absolutely. So NatureMetrics, our mission is to make biodiversity measurable at scale. And we want to do this in a high integrity way so we can underpin global goals. And biodiversity is something that is it's much more acknowledged now as a key sustainability area of focus, but we have some very ambitious goals and it's a very, very urgent need to address it. We believe at NatureMetrics we have the technology that can provide high integrity data to bring different stakeholders together and actually accelerate some of the action that we need to see within biodiversity. So we want to be that trusted partner to make the change happen.
Mm. And you have been working in a really exciting pilot project for the first time with Cruise together with MSC. And can you share with us what was like the scope and the focus of that project?
Absolutely. So, as you said, our work is grounded in eDNA, and actually our solution started within the marine space. So actually taking microfragments of DNA from water samples and being able to build up the entire tree of life at the individual species level. And when you think about how that can be applied and how it can be used, actually the cruise industry is a perfect application of that technology because they spend so much time across the world's oceans. And when you think about climate change, obviously there's a lot of work happening around how do you store carbon, how do you decarbonize your supply chains, etc. But actually nature and biodiversity is the solution to climate change. And when you think about the cruise industry, they do have a responsibility to actually help us preserve the oceans. It's where they're spending so much of their time. It's what their industry depends on. So for us, it really was only a matter of time before we started looking at who those key partners are within the cruise line space, within shipping, that could really help us map the oceans. And then once you have that data and you're able to really monitor it over time and understand change and understand areas of vulnerability, that's incredibly powerful in terms of being able to mobilize action across different governments, because fundamentally the oceans will require an international response. But we need people out there in the field, which is effectively what our cruise liners are, really generating the data to help us drive those decisions.
Yeah, and we have been talking quite a bit about that, how ships, vessels, and especially cruise ships are really optimal innovation labs, really. Because they're moving from port to port, getting a lot of people on board that are also, eligible change makers when we talk about the guests and passengers as well as the crew, and specifically when you started working with MSC, what kind of need is it that they had identified where you were a good match, and what specifically has a pilot required from you?
No, absolutely. So our work with MSC Foundation, and initially conversations were very much around how can they contribute to biodiversity, but specifically in relation to providing biodiversity data from hard to reach areas. And these hard to reach areas effectively lay along MSC's route. And I think the first piece was very much, you have a massive cruise line ship, how do you collect the water samples? And so we had a really fantastic session with them trying to work out how we actually stay on board the ship and extract the water from the cooling system and pass that through our filters. But what this meant was they were able to collect samples every single day along their route. And so when you start to pull all of that data out and you start to map the species presence across these different locations and start to group them, what we were able to do with them was actually identify areas of high biodiversity, low biodiversity across those routes. And the ambition was to expand this across other routes. So our first piece of work with them started in the Nordics and then went up to Iceland and across to Greenland. So we have a beautiful mapping of everything from sea otters to puffins and fin whales that they encountered along the way, but didn't actually see a lot of this biodiversity. And what we were trying to do was then look at how we can take the structure for that particular route and apply it across other routes as well. And what you do when you start to see the intersection of these different routes from these different cruise lines is actually effectively build a biodiversity layer of our entire oceans.
Yeah, and that is so interesting. And I think that's also something that changes with seasons. We don't really think about the fact that the ocean nature and biodiversity follow seasons in the same way that we're used to when we talk about life and growth on land, right?
Absolutely. And when you start to understand what those patterns are and how those patterns are indicated in terms of the health of your biodiversity in different areas, it's not just what is there now, what is there today, but how has that changed over time? How does that compare to other geographies? Where are we seeing unusual behavior and what might be driving that? And you start to build up a really rich picture of what is happening across the sea. And like you say, the cruises are there, they can collect samples every day, they're regularly going out across those routes. And so when you're starting to track change over time, you don't have big gaps either. You're able to pick out the patterns and the fluctuations, but the more data you collect, actually you're less skewed by some of the outliers as well.
And so you did this pilot and you had an ambition and a plan to continue with additional projects, additional routes. And can you explain to us, where are you in the journey today? Because that has been your first project working with cruise specifically. So what's your ambition and targets for your team now when it comes to the cruise sector? How far along are you, and how can we help?
Absolutely. This was our pilot project with the MSC Foundation. We shared the results back. They were just an incredible reflection of what they had encountered along that route. What we're now waiting for is the continuation of that work. So that requires additional funding from their foundation to actually be able to put in place the monitoring across additional routes and their ships as well. But what that work did do for us was really raise awareness across the shipping industry more broadly. We had some fantastic coverage across LinkedIn, social media, just really bringing to life the biodiversity that they found along those routes. And so what we have seen is actually engagement from Norwegian cruise liners, for example, who now, are engaging with us with very ambitious plans and actually talking about multiple routes in that initial pilot. So even, with most of our organizations, they will test the technology, really try and understand what data it gives them and how they can use that data. What we're seeing is actually the pilot itself is extending from one ship, one route to multiple ships, multiple routes, and actually really helps accelerate that route to scale. So, from the perspective of actually getting us going within the industry, it has been great. We're super ambitious in terms of how we want to extend that going forward. So not just looking at cruise companies, but also extending to industrial shipping. And, again, when you think about the routes that they cover there, they're quite different. But really thinking about all of those different industries that cross the ocean, how can we weave all of that together to build an incredibly rich data bank that we can then use for benchmarking, we can use it for restoration analysis. And in terms of support, it really is that, the commitment from these organizations to give back. Fundamentally, their entire industry is dependent on the ocean. And with the cruise liners, like you said, there is a huge opportunity to engage their passengers. And part of going on a cruise is actually really seeing the different landscapes, really seeing nature at its best. How do we bring that to life on board the cruise ships? And I think that is a piece that we're still working on, but really be using it as an opportunity to engage and educate the public, because fundamentally what we're going to do then is really spread the message around the importance of nature, the importance of holding corporations accountable for the impact that they're having through their activities. And this can, yes, be an accountability mechanism, but actually could be a really positive engagement mechanism for cruise companies as well.
Absolutely, because I mean, a contribution to fund projects like this, it's not really just about doing philanthropy or supporting something good. It can actually be the baseline for building new business models where this is part of a more long-term value driving guest experience part of the layer that I think definitely will be coming more and more on the agenda moving ahead. And I wonder, because obviously you have a very strong background from the startup and growth company side. Can you elaborate a bit on how the corporate capabilities and resources of MSC enabled and strengthened your work as a startup, and then also look at a little bit about which kind of core capabilities that you have from NatureMetrics side that are needed for a giant like MSC?
Absolutely. I think as a startup and scale up, you're fundamentally constantly chasing scale. And there's this loop where you need to demonstrate scale to get credibility, but you need the credibility to achieve the scale. So actually having these initial corporate partners that really believe in the work that you're doing, that are willing to vouch for you, to put their credibility out across their industry, really helps give you that foothold within the space as a market leader. And NatureMetrics, fundamentally, we've always been focused on the scientific integrity of our solutions. Biodiversity is incredibly complex. We're not trying to abstract that complexity away. What we're trying to do is provide these large corporates with the tools to actually embrace the complexity, that translate it into something that is actionable, that is shareable, that can actually bring people and multiple stakeholders together. And, we have the largest commercial eDNA labs in the world. We've done monitoring in over 110 countries. But what this gives us is a database that means that we can actually not only identify what is there, but also help organizations understand what maybe shouldn't be there. So, looking at things like invasive species, for example, and, the economic impact of that across ports, harbors, and agriculture is huge.
Yeah, it's enormous.
Massive. And actually being able to identify that before the damage has happened completely aligned with business goals and business return. And I think, the thing that we miss often about biodiversity is it's good business sense. This isn't just a sustainability initiative. Fundamentally, almost all of our economic activity is dependent on nature and healthy functioning ecosystems. And what we're really trying to do is provide the tools for our corporates to understand what their risks and dependencies are, and then take the actions to address that, as opposed to sitting there in the dark and saying, we can't measure it, we don't know what's going on, and actually we're just going to turn a blind eye until it gets really, really problematic.
Exactly. And they get all over the news instead.
Yes, exactly.
And that kind of brings me in. I mean, that's it's a very common attitude for us as human beings, right? If something is complex and difficult to fix, we rather, just push it out until we have to tackle it.
Yeah.
And when it's, of course, much, much more difficult and much more expensive to tackle it. And I want to talk to you about unresolved pain points from the experiences that are done so far, and your general journey in towards like the maritime and cruise. What are the key issues or hinders that you experience to get in the door to enable scaling and a robust growth alongside the cruise sector, and where you have a clear ambition to team up with cruise companies and other innovators to get in and move this into the next stage?
I would put this down to why us and why now. And I think when you're looking across corporates, we break them down into different sectors and industries. And, the use case is slightly different for all of them. But a lot of the time we will encounter a piece, and we saw it with the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, where biodiversity is constantly identified as a risk, but given all the geopolitical tension, it's not the most urgent risk right now. And I think that is the challenge with a lot of corporates as well. You have some incredibly forward-thinking corporates that we work with, such as Unilever, Anglo-American, who really understand how nature fits into their operations and its importance. They're really investing in that across their portfolio. And then you have others that maybe, kick the can down the road. We have very, very strong carbon targets. And so that often does take up a lot of the budgets that are allocated towards sustainability. But then once they have the data, what do they do with the data? When you think about biodiversity, it's still an emerging space for a lot of large corporates. And, it's about more than just saying we can give you some monitoring. It's really helping them understand how they can extract the most value from that. And I think that is the piece that we're really trying to focus on is, first of all, getting familiar with the technology, putting it into practice, and actually finding that it is much more simple to use than they had initially anticipated. But then once they see the results on the other side, how do they leverage those? What can they do with them? Who do they share it with? What decisions should it drive? And really helping them maximize the return, because fundamentally, action taken off the back of biodiversity is positive action for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were to choose today, what would your ideal partners for this next stage moving into like the maritime space be? If you could describe kind of the capabilities, the type of cruise line corporations that you would love to work with for the next years?
Yeah, I think for us it is very much about spreading awareness. And fundamentally, every passenger on a cruise ship is a consumer. And we've seen it across all aspects of sustainability, deforestation, the palm oil industry, how effective consumer spending can be in terms of raising awareness for environmental issues. So for us, our partner is really somebody that is going to help educate consumers. It's going to help educate the next generation, because I think, particularly younger people are just much more aware of environmental concern than we have seen before as well. So a partner that is not only going to help us map the ocean and build up those data banks and really start to provide those data sets to decision makers that can help with meeting the 30 by 30 goals that we have set ourselves, but can also then put in place the initiatives on board. So actually really bring that biodiversity to light, tell the story of some of the challenges that are being faced across these different locations. Everything from temperatures rising right the way through to, coral reef degradation, and really helping people leave that trip much more aware of the impact of where they're spending their money, who they're engaging with. Because fundamentally, if we shift that behavior, then that aligns the economic gains of every business across almost every industry with sustainability and impact.
Absolutely, because I think we've seen the same in the maritime world a decade back when we started talking much more about ocean plastics, and suddenly everybody through storytelling, citizen science, different initiatives that came out in the public media, people started caring about ocean plastic. And it was an area where every individual felt that they could actually come in and do something, even if they were just, one small human, a kid, a grown up, an old person, you could still actually come in and contribute. And I think it would be so exciting and interesting to see how cruise can actually mobilize this same kind of mind shift among guests and passengers in the years to come, where you onboard a cruise and you come back home as an ocean activist or somebody that really cares and see the value of contributing and the value of how life below the surface is actually instrumental and critical for our existence as human beings. So it is extremely interesting to see how we can get the big corporates into this sphere together with innovators. And then I think definitely that, you know, a lot of the individuals out there, for them, it can be much more engaging and inspiring when they hear about these topics from founders and from the startup side.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we've done a lot of work with our platform and the software where the data comes to. I mean, if you look at the data that comes out of our sequencing machine, you definitely need a PhD in ecology to understand that. But we've done a huge amount of work on the software side to actually take those, you know, really long and quite complex data sets and turn them into something incredibly visual. You can see maps, you can see descriptions of the different species, you can understand what's endangered and what's vulnerable and where they are across your route. And so really providing those tools to the cruise ships, because if they can drive small actions across every one of their passengers, that will drive a movement. That is far more effective than the direct impacts of a small amount of additional spend from their sustainability budget. So it's a multiplier effect.
Absolutely. And so on the one part, you have the big corporates as your customers, partners. But then for these next stages, what type, if you look at NatureMetrics as one part of like a value chain of innovative solutions that can help inspire, engage, and make us all to become problem solvers on this, what type of other innovators is it that you would be looking to partner up with that could be, you know, forming this type of package solution, basically, to bring in to the pipelines of the large corporates here?
Yes. I mean, the challenges around climate and nature are complex. And so we're going to need a whole tapestry of solutions to solve those problems. And I think this is where you're right, corporates do find it challenging because, you know, you speak to one startup, they may solve one small part of the problem, but then that still leaves the other 80% that they need to address. I mean, from our perspective, we're very much about generating high integrity data around biodiversity. Now, the eDNA part we do in-house, we do that very well. We have very high standards with that. But what we're now starting to do is work across other data sources. So we're now starting to incorporate satellite data. We're not sending satellites into the sky. Who are satellite data providers? We're now starting to look at third-party data layers in relation to, for example, biomass. Great. What partners are there that can provide those? We're now extending into bioacoustics as well. So even within the biodiversity space, even just looking at the different data sources, you're probably looking at 3 or 4 different providers that need to come together to give you the full picture of what is happening within an ecosystem. And when you extend this more broadly and you say, well, I have my data, now what am I doing with it? You know, who are the stakeholders that I need to be engaging? How am I driving action off the back of it? What reporting do I need to provide? Again, there are more partners that need to come in to the mix. And I think, you know, the Earthshot Prize are obviously somebody that does this very, very well. But, you know, their entire mission is bringing together this multitude of solutions and thinking about how they can help drive partnerships and adoption, that are looking at it across everything from our ocean to nature to cleaning the air. And every corporate may need a slightly different mix, but it's really important for the startups and the innovators to have those relationships so that when they're engaging with a corporate, they're able to fully understand the needs that they need to address and bring in the partners at the right point to kind of solve those problems more holistically. So yeah, the Earthshot finalists were the first starting point for us last year in terms of really thinking about how different solutions can connect together, but also looking at it across the whole value chain. So everything from data generation on the ground right the way through to how we engage with governments and large corporations as well.
Thank you. And you will be at Sea Trade this spring in April.
Yes, I
How
will.
long are you staying, and where and when can people meet you?
So I am in town from Monday to Wednesday. So I think that's the 7th to 9th of April. I will be at the conference center in Miami. very available to meet anybody that would love to talk about biodiversity data, how they can contribute to the cause, and also how they can use it to generate more value for their businesses as well.
We are so much looking forward to that, since we are bringing a group of pioneers and innovators together that week. And then there is one common factor that we've seen is high on the agenda for everyone that are moving towards new solutions, whether they are small startups, big corporates, or anything in between. And that is the access to talents, the brains and the hands and the willing people that will come in to help us scale the solutions for the future. And C-Trade has an initiative focused on tomorrow's talents today. And I'm wondering, since NatureMetrics is operating, across quite multiple industries and with very specific areas you work with. Can you share with us what are kind of some of the common factors, kind of human capabilities and skill sets that you see relevant and that you really want to get more of when it comes to talents across these sectors, based on your long experiences so far?
Absolutely. So I would say, when I think about the NatureMetrics team, and I think this applies more broadly to climate tech as well, is we're all united by a mission. We have a purpose. We want to have an impact through the work that we're doing. And I think that provides and it creates an extra drive in people that, we know these problems are hard to solve. Otherwise, somebody would have already solved them. But it means that we're going to try and we're going to fail. And then we have to try again. And I think there's a resilience and a level of initiative that we see in people that are really successful in the space to get back up again, try a bit harder, just keep pushing, drive the mission forward. And that is across kind of all disciplines. So, whether we're talking about the team in the labs, right the way through to our ecologists or our engineers and, our commercial team, it is really about how do we engage with people, but how do we drive these problems, drive these solutions forward, even though a lot of the time we may encounter pushback. And I think we see that in many different ways through the passion, the creative problem solving that people bring, to really looking at what is coming through in terms of the latest innovations. And, obviously we're data companies, so we're doing a lot of work with AI and LLMs, etc., but really thinking about what those new capabilities are and how they can help us accelerate our work. And instead of waiting for us to go through 2 or 3 levels of approval that we might see in larger companies, but let's get building. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what new problems we can solve. And particularly, how do we do it in a way that will really help simplify things for our users and drive that adoption? And I think particularly within our space, the adoption is so closely linked to the impact that we can have. The more people we are working with, the more people that are empowered to make data-driven decisions for nature, the more positive impact that we're going to have.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And then for a last insight before we round off, Dimple, and get prepared for Miami, are there any personal hacks or tips that you would like to share with other founders or talents that could become future founders out there?
Good question. So the thing that I always tell founders, and I do quite a bit of mentoring with female founders as well, is you are going to fail. Fail fast. Like, do it, learn from it, and then go again. And I think, what we often overlook is a lot of these companies take, they take capital to get off the ground. There's a lot of research involved. How can you do that as quickly as possible? Because, you want to make sure that your product is out there before you burn through your runway, for example. So really having one eye on the fact that time actually really does equal money in this space. So learning from those mistakes, asking the question, like being really quite forthright in terms of reaching out to people and asking how they're doing something, why they're doing something a particular way, and why they wouldn't do it another way. Because all of these are real life data points that you can use in building your product. And then the third thing I would say is just find that amazing talent. Like, find the people that you want to be building with along the way, because it's not going to be easy. And what makes it I say more bearable when things are not going well is the people that you're surrounded with, but also, what are the minds that you want around you to help solve some of the problems that you're going to be facing? And I think that is very, very important. The entire way through a business is defined by the kind of talent that it is able to attract and how it works together and the culture that it builds. So I would say those are kind of the three key things that I would advise.
That is great words of practical wisdom. And I am so much looking forward to seeing you at SeaTrade, Dimple. And we are really looking forward to gather the cruise pioneer corporates and the innovators in the Pioneers Lounge hosted by Tool during that week. And to all of those tuning in and listening in, stay updated towards Miami as we have more amazing executives and founders joining us on the pod, both before Miami and on site. So have a great day, and thank you so much for joining us, Dimple.
Thank you for having me.